because they're not going to like my answer. The answer is that Jose Baez gets what's called absolute immunity from anything he says in furtherance of his defense of Casey Anthony, and that goes the same for any lawyer. And let me give you an alternative version. How many times have we heard about a prosecutor that's prosecuted someone that's later been turned out to not just be not guilty, meaning there wasn't enough evidence to prove it, but to actually be innocent of the charges? If that was the case, we would have those people be suing the prosecutors left and right all the time for pursuing evidence that, or pursuing prosecutions that later turned out to be false because the witnesses that the prosecution relied on were false. And so we give those prosecutors absolute immunity, and on the same token, we give defense attorneys absolute immunity when they try to point the finger at other people. Now, with that said, both prosecutors and defense attorneys have an ethical obligation to make those arguments based upon evidence they actually think will come in a trial. And so I can only assume that Jose Baez believes that Casey Anthony will testify to these things, and therefore he's going to be entitled to this absolute immunity. However, if it comes out that he did not rely on this in good faith, or if Casey Anthony, surprise, surprise, claims in a post-conviction motion that she never said any of that stuff, I think the bar could definitely sanction Jose Baez, but that would be a real long time down the road. But no, George and Roy Kronk have no recourse at all, and that's just where it is.
That's really too bad. I understand why they do that, because if a defense attorney, and you, Richard, would know this, as a defense attorney, if you always had to worry about a lawsuit over what you said, it would be very difficult to try and defend your client, but still it just seems so wrong. We do have a number you can call in with your questions, 818-602-4929, and I'd like to bring Kimster into the discussion now. Kimster, I want to read some members' quotes from the forum from this week. We have some great ones. Betty Davis Eyes wrote, Casey refused a visit from Cindy on Mother's Day. Indeed, the irony is rich. G.A. Mom said, Casey knows she is losing control over her parents, and that's why she is crying. Quiche, in reference to Casey's meltdown, said, thanks for the screenshots, everyone. They are priceless. And finally, Stiletto says, this is all about loss of control. Casey Anthony is fizzled. She does not control Cindy anymore. Look at her tractor-beaming eyes at her mother leaving, willing her to look. Mama, don't play that game no more, honey. Tantrum. Kimster, offer us up your thoughts on what's been going on the forum this week, what Mr. Hornsby has said, and the trial, and wrap it up in like 5 seconds.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say that I've been in awe as I reflect on past discussions our members have had and how so much of the evidence our members analyzed and combed over the past 3 years is now being presented by the prosecution to the jury. It's pretty amazing. I wonder if the research done on Web Sleuth was viewed by the district attorneys, thus saving Florida taxpayers any money, because it sure would have been a great archive for them to reflect on. Also, I wanted to, part of your question, and I'm talking kind of funny because of the echo, by the way, but part of your question is that what Mr. Hornsby said, and I thought it was interesting when he said witnesses would testify. The defense thought that witnesses would testify the way they have been in the past 3 years, and they're not doing it, which I think has a lot to do with why Casey had a little breakdown when her mother testified, because some people think they read her lips to have said the past 3 years. Well, maybe she was saying the past 3 years she's been doing this and this and this, and now today of all days she's, not being true to form. And that might be why she was quite upset this week.
I agree. I think that's exactly it. And I was surprised to see the cameras on Casey so clearly when the sound was off, because I could read some of what she was saying. And, I'm sure somebody's got a professional lip reader in there trying to figure it out. I just don't think that would be fair to Casey, to be quite honest. Now, we talk about Casey being so upset after her mother walked away from the witness stand without looking at her. And I think all of us can agree that Casey was showing real emotion at this time. Mr. Hornsby, I'm not sure if you saw this, and I don't know what the jury saw either. Maybe you can fill us in. Did the jury see Casey's behavior, her crying, her being so upset, If you know that, if you have an idea. And also, if this were your client, what would you advise her to do? Would you tell her to knock it off, or how would you handle it?
Um, there's no right way to tell a client how to act. I mean, as I think a lot of the readers know, I've just had 2 murder trials, murder and manslaughter trial in the last year and a half that both involved victims that were children. One of them was a woman who had 4 kids. It was a Lauren Gress trial, and she had the same problem. She cried. There's no doubt they were genuine tears, but how and when to cry is a difficult question. It's only a psychologist knows whether it's correct or not. But I definitely wouldn't want her, the way she was so stone-faced when her parents were testifying. It definitely seemed strange to me. So I think that there's no right or wrong answer to this because I don't know what they're trying to portray Casey as. But I definitely would have her to try to act a little bit less extreme in her feelings. Now, as far as whether the jury heard, Casey Anthony or saw the outburst, I don't believe they did. I think the jury had already left the courtroom before she had that little outrage she had about Cindy. But clearly it seems that I think that Casey thought that her mother especially was going to support her more in what was going to happen. Why she would think that, I don't know. She's, Cindy desperately tried to talk to her before the trial started. She's rebuffed her to every turn. And you just got to wonder why the defense is going down this road. If they were just stuck with an accidental death, I think they would have had such an easier time trying to defend the case, because now they're not just defending the death itself, but they're defending, who's actually right in the molestation accusations. Is it Casey or is it George? And I think if they were just left with an accidental thing, that the family would have supported Casey more in the way they would be testifying.
Exactly. I think when everybody heard about the accidental situation, I bet you most people thought, okay, that's plausible. And then they went off on this yellow brick road in this Land of Oz crap that was just unbelievable. And I think that shows, and I think you'll agree with me, Mr. Hornsby, Baez's lack of understanding this whole situation. Could he be that up in the clouds, up in the night?
Listen, all I can say about Baez is his inexperience is showing. And never mind Baez. I mean, Cheney Mason, what the hell is he doing? I mean, his one cross-examination of Mr. Crisp was absolutely embarrassing. The number one thing you learn as a defense attorney, especially in long trials where you have to worry about the jury becoming annoyed or aggravated by you, is not to ask questions that aren't going to advance your case one way or the other. Like sitting there basically barking at a witness who was there to establish a simple fact that he saw Kaylee on one day out of 100. It's ridiculous. And so the defense team they just look absolutely bewildered. I don't know that they have a strong game plan in place. And if I could, I'd like to hit on a few things I think will be interesting to see how they play out now that we see Baez has basically shown his cards that I think the readers might be interested in.
I'd love it. Go for it.
Well, the first thing which I think is going to be really interesting is Jose Baez put out there that because Casey was molested as a child, she therefore lacked the ability to tell the truth and grieve appropriately. The problem is they have no witness that will provide the link between a person that's molested, therefore has the inability to come forward and tell the truth and or grieve. And the only witness they could have that would support such a theory, and it's almost like some type of a battered woman syndrome, but instead it's a child molestation syndrome, if you will. They would need a psychologist, and they don't have any psychologists. And the thing is that both psychologists said that while she definitely probably had some issues in her past, she didn't have any mental health disorders. Even though we all think she's a sociopath, they didn't diagnose her as a sociopath or a psychopath. And that's very important because without those diagnoses, Jose Baez can't pull these witnesses in there to try to say, well, yes, because she was molested, that therefore explains her conduct, which is essentially an ugly coping type defense. And I've got to wonder why the defense why the state attorney's office hasn't filed a motion basically saying that Jose Baez can't even imply some type of ugly coping or diminished capacity or any type of mental health defense because he doesn't have the witnesses that would support it. I know this from personal experience because in the lower ingress trial I tried last year, the state filed the exact same motion against me and they won. And that's the major issue on appeal, is whether or not it was appropriate. But I actually had doctors that would say my client was suffering from postpartum depression and other things. So what I think will be interesting is, one, if the state files such a motion, and two, if in rebuttal, let's say Casey does testify, they don't actually call the defense psychologist to say, isn't it true you examined Casey Anthony, and isn't it true you were unable to diagnose her with any type of mental health disease that would support her inability? And then thirdly, there's not a single psychological study that says that correlates between a person being molested and being unable to grieve and or come forward and tell the truth. Now, it is true that someone's molested is more likely to be a liar and things like that, but there's no study that says because of that they are unable to grieve for their own child. The other issue that I think is going to be really, Bias kind of threw it out there during opening statement that they didn't test the bones for chlorine, essentially. Here's the two biggest problems he's going to face with that. One, in order to get chlorine or any type of chemical into your bones, you have to actually digest the chemical on a considerable basis. And what's interesting is Dr. Vass, if you read his studies, one of the things that he talks about is that exact same issue, is that he always found, whenever he found dead bodies, he always found fluoride is one of the chemicals, and there was no fluoride present in what he found in the back of the trunk. But he attributed that to the fact that Kaylee was so young that she hadn't digested enough fluorinated water for the fluoride to actually get into her bones.
Right.
So that theory that Baez threw out there is it's kind of just throw it up against the wall and see if a jury would buy that if you fall in the pool and you drown, therefore the chlorine would go into your bones. That's simply not true. You would literally have to drink chlorinated water like day in and day out, like Michael Phelps type thing where you go swimming every day. The second thing, which I think is just going to be a bombshell, is that, sure, the state didn't test for that at all. The problem they have is the defense had the opportunity to test for it because they did have their own person go out and do an autopsy of the remains. And the first question I would have on cross-examination from the state is, sir, did you not have the remains? Were you ever asked to do a test on the bones for chlorine or whatever the issue may be? And then the question is going to be, well, why not? And if he says, I don't know why not, well, then you mean Jose Baez never asked you to do that? Because remember, this story, whatever it may be, even though we're just hearing it now, presumably Casey Anthony would have told it to Jose Baez a long, long time ago.
I'm just sitting here dumbfounded at what you said, because it's so obvious to little me in Wanship, Utah, that Jose Baez is just driving this train right over a cliff. I mean, what you just brought up right now is so apparent. Why can't he see that? What is going on with this man? And we do have callers, and callers, I'll get to you really quickly. I just want to chat a little bit more with Mr. Hornsby. Help me understand this. How can this guy be a lawyer? He has to be smart and not realize that if he brings up the bones and the chlorine, it's going to turn around and bite him in the end.
I don't know. Listen, there's some good lawyers, some bad lawyers. Here's the way I approach a case. I don't know. Maybe Jose Baez still has a plan that I'm not seeing. If anybody watched Mark O'Mara, he's an attorney around here. He was on